am filming this in the middle of a heat wave. I am trying to keep my hair off the back of my neck right now. It's a humidex of 40 Celsius here, or about, I guess about 105 Fahrenheit. And I realized that I never made a video on how to prevent overheating while waist training. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Despite my Caribbean heritage, I'm actually a little bit heat intolerant, and some of my extended family will not hesitate to kind of berate me on this. But anyways, I do have to be careful not to overheat, and I have experienced heat exhaustion in the past. I do have a lot of experience with keeping cool in the summer. And when you're wearing a corset, you have all these extra layers of fabric around your core where you keep most of your body heat. So it's all the more important to try and keep cool in the summer. Every once in a while, I still hear or read of a corset wearer who had fainted at a nightclub or a Ren fair or an anime convention, and oftentimes it's more explained by dehydration and overheating, or low blood sugar if you hadn't had a meal in a while, or simply exhaustion if you've been running around a lot. I have another video on this called Corsets and the Victorian Fainting Culture, where I go into the details about the Victorians' kind of weird preoccupation with swooning ladies, because that was the proper thing to do. And so if you haven't seen that video, I'll link it right up there in the cards above. So many people erroneously believe that you faint in a corset because you can't breathe in it, and obviously that's not the case. As long as the corset is fitted properly, you should be able to breathe comfortably. But getting back onto overheating, it is one other reason why some people can feel sick or feel faint if they are wearing a corset, especially in a warmer climate or during the hot weather. So I'm going to make another video in the future on tips on wearing your corsets as part of your cosplay. But for now, I'm going to give you my 3 biggest tips for keeping cool while wearing your corset. My first tip, if you can afford it, is to choose a corset that's thinner or more breathable. So mesh corsets are the obvious thing that comes to mind, but they do have their pros and cons. I have a whole other video dedicated to that, comparing mesh corsets and their strength, their durability, their flexibility, their breathability. So if you want to check that out, I'll put it up in the cards or down in the description down below. Mesh corsets are obviously more thin and breezy. They allow the heat to escape and the sweat to evaporate, but they usually don't have the longevity of an all-cotton corset. Now, there are some mesh corsets that are designed for waist training, like this heavy-duty one from Contour Corsets, which is now a defunct company, unfortunately, because I really loved their stuff. But more often than not, when you're talking about an off-the-rack mesh corset, you probably won't expect it to last a few months or maybe a year tops if you are wearing it kind of like on an everyday basis. It will start to show some wear and disintegrate, or some of the seams might start to fall apart, so do be aware of that. What some Victorians did in the summers or in hotter climates, like for instance when the British had colonized India, is that they had corsets made from a single layer of strong cotton, which you can do as well. Granted, single layer corsets used to not be very popular in terms of like the modern waist training trends and everything, because they seemed a bit flimsy compared to the off-the-rack corsets that were made with many, many layers, because there was this misconception that fewer layers meant less strength. But as the community of waist trainers have grown over the years, including many who train throughout the year and some who live in hotter climates, I think the demand for thinner and more lightweight corsets has grown, and you may start seeing more single-layer corsets available for waist training. And although mesh corsets seem to be a thing that only really happened in the last 5 years, in truth, the Victorians also had mesh and ventilated corsets. Lace Embrace Atelier in British Columbia, Canada, has made recreations of these, including mesh and skeleton corsets, and this other corset made from really cute cotton eyelet fabric. Narrowed Visions has also created this 1895 ventilated corset, which looks gorgeous. I had also experimented with making my own skeleton corset, which was hideous, and I dubbed it the Waffle Iron because of the marks that it left on my torso. But yes, it was a learning experience, and I know that I would do many things differently if I were to recreate that again. My second tip is to stay hydrated, and this may seem incredibly obvious, but it's too important to leave out. Even if you don't think you're sweating under your corset, believe me, you are. I mean, obviously you should stay hydrated no matter what and throughout the year, even if you are in an air-conditioned environment. Also, air-conditioned places tend to have dry air, so that's another reason to drink water. But especially if you're out and about in the heat, keep a water bottle with you and sip it every hour at minimum, preferably every half an hour or even more often. I would not recommend waiting until you're parched and then chugging a lot of water, because if you feel dehydrated and nauseated and you chug like 3 cups of water all at once, you're probably going to feel even more sick. And I know this from experience. In my early 20s, when I was going to nightclubs, even if I didn't drink alcohol, if I was just dancing up a storm and really dehydrated and then I chugged water, that was pretty much the end of my night. I felt so sick after that. And this was even before I was wearing corsets on a regular basis. And your symptoms tend to be even more amplified when you're in a corset, especially if you are taking in or consuming a lot of fluid or food very quickly when you have your waist compressed. So you don't want to be chugging water, you want to be sipping regularly throughout the day. And if you are sweating profusely, you're also losing a lot of salt. So put a pinch of salt or electrolytes in your water bottle and again, sip frequently. My third tip, if you have a tendency to overheat, one amazing thing that was recommended to me by somebody else was a Bodice cooler or a Bodice chiller. It's basically a metal vial that you put in the freezer in advance. Now, some of them you can open up and you can put water in it, but some of them are already sealed and they have coolant in them already. But basically, you stick it in the freezer in advance, and then you can stick it in your cleavage or down the front of your corset to keep you cool for hours. This works a little bit better with overbust corsets compared to underbust corsets, because most overbusts leave you with a bit of space between the breast and at the sternum, whereas underbust corsets tend to fit very flush against your rib cage, including your sternum. So putting the Bodice chiller down in the front of an underbust corset can get a little bit squishy unless you are kind of opening up the back of the corset a little bit. Now, Bodice coolers are surprisingly difficult to find. Sometimes they're sold at Ren fairs and they can be made out of metal or glass. Personally, I'd be afraid of putting glass or something breakable that close to my solar plexus, but that's just me. I'm sure they've probably tempered it if it's made to go from hot to cold very frequently. But I would probably more often than not go for the metal one instead. But I have found a few Bodice coolers online, and I will link a couple of examples in the description down below because I can't really put it in the cards. One is truly marketed as a body cooler, whereas you can also get one of those long stainless steel chillers designed for beer or wine, and it's long and skinny enough to put down your corset. I've actually not bought a Bodice chiller for myself yet, although it is on my wish list. But what I have done is I have taken these little freezies or ice pops in the past, just the little ones here, not the jumbo ones. And what I would do is I would just wrap it up in a little piece of paper towel so the plastic doesn't give me a paper cut or, plastic cut. And the paper towel also catches the condensation and prevents frost nip from the freezer being right next to your skin. And I would stick this in my cleavage instead. A lot of Bodice coolers are sold for $25, $30, $40 each or more, depending on where you get them in the Ren fairs and conventions, whereas these are 20 cents each. And since they're sealed, you can pop them back in the freezer when you're done with them, or let's be honest, I usually end up eating them. And obviously, air conditioning is an incredible feat of technology. I love it so much. And it is your best friend in warmer weather, summer weather, hotter climates, and all that. But these are some ways of keeping cool if you are outside and you don't have access to air conditioning, or if you can't afford air conditioning because, some people don't. But what did the Victorians do before the invention of air conditioning? Well, they had the mesh corsets and the ventilated corsets, as I mentioned before, but they also kept cool by having hand fans. They also had, I think, spring-activated ceiling fans. It wasn't quite, electricity at the time, but I think it was on a bit of a spring and you could pull a cord to have it go round and round. And they also carried parasols to shade themselves from the sun. And most of their clothing was made from cotton or linen that was more cool and breezy for the summertime. So that's all I have to say about keeping cool in the summertime when wearing your corset and when waist training. If you have any other suggestions or tips for us, feel free to leave a comment down below or make your own video response to this. And thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all next week for another video.